Going live now to the Conservative Political Action Conference. CPAC is what it's known by. They're holding their 3-day annual conference this week here in Washington. Started yesterday and continues today. And during our day-long coverage, we expect remarks from former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney, members of Congress, including Senators Orrin Hatch and John Thune, and Congressman Ron Paul and Marsha Blackburn, and former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. This is live coverage on C-SPAN 2.
Good morning, CPAC. How is everyone? Are you excited about 2011? Are you more excited about 2012? All right, that's what I like to hear. So we're talking today with two esteemed panelists. I want to bring them out. Pollsters extraordinaire. The first one needs, of course, no introduction. Pat Caddell. Former Democratic pollster under President Carter. He was a boy wonder, and now he's a manly wonder. Everyone, Pat Caddell. Also, and a Republican pollster to go with our Democratic pollster, John McLaughlin. Please. Now, I'm going to set this up here for just a moment because I think what both these guys have to say is very important. And we in the audience, we must really take this to heart because this is not going to be necessarily good news politically for Republicans or for people who are afraid of the Democratic Party on security issues. Because the Democrats last year won on terrorism. There was an exit poll, and Pat Caddell is going to get into that because this is his number. When you looked at the exit poll from 2010, the midterm elections, 9% of voters said that the single most important factor to them when they pulled the lever last November was, do you remember the ink cartridges coming from Yemen on the UPS cargo planes headed to the Chicago synagogues that were probably going to blow up somewhere over the eastern seaboard? That was listed as the single most important event for voters by 9% of them. Of those voters, 55% went Democrat. So bear that in mind. And by the way, this is a trend that was going back even some, because in late 2009 into early 2010, as Obama's numbers were tanking across the board on all the issue sets, one issue, Barack Obama had a plurality of support, of approval, and that was on terrorism and national security. So the question is, why do these politics happen when the reality, I think to everyone here in the room, seems to be otherwise? To answer that, we have Pat Caddell and John McLaughlin.
John's going to run the show with a bunch of slides because I'm not trusted with anything mechanical. Although I'll tell you, watching
I think you set me up for the fall.
Yeah, exactly. but watching what's happening in Egypt, this could not be a more perfect panel. I'm watching what's happening to President Obama. It reminds me of Lucy, Charlie Brown, and the football. Every time he thinks he's got him gone, he's back. But the point that Joel just made, and it's an important thing to discuss, we're here on behalf of the Secure America Now organization. When you can go to the website, secureamericanow.org, which you'll see. This is in the same spirit of my friend Richard Dreyfuss, who I'm so happy to see here. Will be stoned by a lot of people for being here. But the idea of this group is a grassroots. It's a new group, and it's a grassroots effort to develop, in fact, to make the narrative of securing America, put it into our political discourse. The point that Joel just made about the 9% of people, the biggest midterm election we've had in my lifetime, and 9% of the people moved at the very last minute. They voted by 13 points more Democratic than Republican because it was rally around the flag, because there was no narrative about foreign policy, the events, the things that are happening. The issue of security for America cannot be just left to the experts. This is something that unites all Americans. And this is a nonpartisan effort because, after all, when 9/11, just to say this, 9/11, there was a moment, the benefit, if they can call it that, 9/11 was that there were no Democrats and Republicans or liberal conservatives in that moment. There were Americans. And a lot of these issues, if we cannot come together and have a platform to both inform ourselves and to have a say to move the leaders, it doesn't matter if Iran gets a nuclear weapon or uses it or gives it away. It affects everyone. If al-Qaeda, the news last week, is much closer to having nuclear dirty weapons and chemical weapons than anyone thought, and that, by the way, got lost in all of the stuff with Egypt. If these things happen, they affect America. But in any event, I'm going to turn over to John. He's going to run through some numbers, and I'm going to talk about a couple numbers, and then we'll...
I was coming here years ago when Reagan was president, and this is an honor to be on the panel with Pat, because Pat was at the Super Bowl electing a president in '76, and I was volunteering for Reagan way back when. But what's amazing is the numbers. And you can find these, our friends at Secure America Now are going to put this on their website, and their website's up there, and they have a booth downstairs that you should go visit. But they have begun to do some very important things that the Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, even liberals can agree on, and it's about the security of the United States. There's a pause here, good. 3 major points. Underneath last election, everything was about, and we elected, I do work for the majority leader, the new majority leader, Eric Cantor, and we work for 20 members, sitting members of the House, 6 or 7 sitting congressmen, governors across the country. Everything last year was about economics. But underneath the economic concerns, terrorism and security threats are there, and I've not seen these numbers percolate since the Cold War the way they are there right now. The Obama administration, you'll see little bits ups and downs depending upon what's going on, but they do not have good ratings. They have weak ratings when it comes to security and foreign policy. And I have a theory that underneath the economy, which everybody says, oh, the president, unemployment's high or not high, underneath the economy, security is really his glass jaw. The one thing that makes the president different than any other elected official we have in the United States is the fact that he has to keep America safe. And in this administration, a lot of people say, well, they don't know if he's Jimmy Carter, they don't know if he's Bill Clinton. I look at him and say, I come from New York, if you couldn't tell from my southern accent, like Pat, South Bronx. But I compare him to David Dinkins. Everybody, when he got elected, thought he was a good, moderate mayor, historic mayor, first African-American. And Dinkins' jobs were leaving. He raised taxes in New York City. What beat him for re-election, what allowed Rudy Giuliani to win, was Crown Heights. When you realized the mayor couldn't keep you safe, you threw him out. The Obama administration, all this chatter about Egypt and the policy, you'll see from these numbers, when people don't think we're safe, that's his glass jaw. And Iran is definitely seen already as a major threat by Americans right now. Most important issue. When you look at the polls, these are polls we did, Secure America Now. You'll find them on their website, secureamericanow.org, O-R-G. The economy was the top concern when you would ask, and this is verbatims off the top of their head, most important concern was the economy, 6 out of 10 voters. However, who or what is the greatest threat to the United States? And these are verbatims off, it's the second answer they're laughing at. These were 1,000 Americans, and this was off of our national survey. Yeah, I couldn't have scripted that better. But the number one answer, and this is what you should pay attention to, the number one answer is terrorism, 14%, verbatim off the top of the voters' heads. And then you have Barack Obama, economy, ourselves, but then you have Iran, 4%. War, 3%, China, 3%, borders, 3%, deficit, 3%, government, 3%. There's a whole slew of other answers that went down, 2% Al-Qaeda, 2% Iraq, 2% Middle East, 2% radical Muslims, 2% Islam. 45%, the plurality of voters, when you categorize these, almost half, cited an external threat off the top of their heads before they touched any other issues. We asked this up front in the questionnaire. The plurality of Americans do not feel safe, and they see external threats. And this is the first time we've seen it in our polls since the end of the Cold War, that Americans feel insecure. This was the rating for the approve or disapprove of Barack Obama. This was towards the end of last year, handling Americans' foreign policy. Probably went up a little bit by January, State of the Union, but 5 to 4, 54 to 42 negative positives, not good. And then Then when you're seeing defense and security, same thing, negative rating, 43 to 51, 5 to 4 net negative. And again, these are 1,000 voters across the United States. Often when I'm briefing elected officials, senators, governors, members of Congress, on poll numbers, I often tell them, you're lucky to get 51%. Poll numbers that are big poll numbers, where you get 60s, 70s, those are big numbers. We should pay attention to them. Do you think President Obama's policies towards Iran will stop them from getting nuclear weapons? The American people, 3 in 4, say no. They are way ahead of us on these issues. The voters are like way ahead of the public officials on this. And then when we asked them, President Barack Obama is committed to a policy of outreach in the Muslim world. Knowing this, do you think this policy has increased or decreased the security of the United States? 51% said decreased, 23% said increased. 2 to 1. They think the president is making us unsafe. And this is, not a good number for people paying attention to this. Again, another big number. How concerned are you about Islamic terrorism in the United States being sponsored by Iran? 64% say concerned, 32% not concerned. 2 to 1, big number across the board, Republicans, Democrats, Independents. Another big number. We asked them, many experts say that Iran is currently developing nuclear weapons. Will the United States be safe with a nuclear Iran? 74% say no. Only 15% say yes. The voters are so far ahead of us on this issue. They've got Iran in focus. They say there's going to be a problem. And again, it's across the board with all parties. This one is a very interesting number. If Iran were to launch a nuclear missile at the United States, do you think the United States has a missile defense system already in place that could shoot down that nuclear missile before it hits the United States? 56% of all Americans say that missile defense system's in place. When they find out it's the wrong answer, it'll be too late. Do you approve or disapprove of the Obama administration endorsing the decision by Russia to supply nuclear fuel for a reactor in Iran? 74% disapprove. It happened. Iran will use its nuclear weapons to threaten the supply of Middle Eastern oil to the United States and its allies. 83% say, yep, that's a serious threat. Only 11% said not a serious threat. 91% are Republicans, 81% of independents, 80% of Democrats. Everybody gets this. Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Saudi, and this was asked last year before any of what's going on in the world right now. Egypt and Saudi Arabia have recently started nuclear programs. Knowing this, do you think President Obama's failure to stop Iran's nuclear program is leading to a nuclear arms race in the Middle East? Yes, 57-25. And Iran is currently developing a nuclear weapon. When Iran is able to produce the nuclear weapon, how likely it is that Iran will launch a nuclear attack in each of the following? Provide nuclear weapons to terrorists to attack an American city. 80% think it's likely. 89 Republicans, 75 Democrats, 75 Independents. What is it? People watch 24, Jack Bauer. You see movies all the time about Islamic terrorists. Public opinion is there already. They think this is possible. Launch a nuclear missile attack on Israel, 79% likely. Launch a nuclear missile attack on the United States, 55. And then when you look at it, you say, do you approve or disapprove of each of the following? The United States publicly providing moral and financial support to, that one is to pro-democratic dissidents in Iran who want to overthrow the radical regime, 57-27 they support. Allowing and assisting Israel to attack and destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program facilities, sanctions don't work, 57-28. And blockading the import of gasoline and food to Iran to stop Iran from building a nuclear weapon, 52-36. Public opinion is already there. And then on this question, using the military to attack and destroy the facilities in Iran, which are necessary to produce nuclear weapons, if sanctions don't work, which they don't think are going to work, 60-30, they support that already. And it's even the Democrats, 46-42 support, Republicans, 75-16, Independents, 62-30.
Let me stop. Let me jump in here. This is a very important thing about Iran, just from my experience, public opinion. And this is backed up by the Pew poll, Fox. I have a whole bunch of polls supporting this. The American, for an issue that has been basically in a vacuum and not dealt with, the American public has focused on this question and the fear of it. The anxiety, what John is talking about here generally we see is a large anxiety about American security. The Iranian issue is unbelievable. What's surprisingly stunning about these numbers, and they've been consistent now for a couple of years on Iran on the question if they acquire nuclear weapons, is that it comes at a time when by 2-to-1 Americans believe that that Iraq and Afghanistan, the wars there, were a mistake. But you know, in Vietnam in the 60s, the belief by the time the 70s came that Vietnam was a mistake colored everyone's in America, the large majority's attitude about any efforts or actions in foreign policy. This is the exact reverse. They're setting this aside. Those numbers become much more significant in light of that. The other point to make, and you see this in a lot of the numbers, and something I'll deal with in a second, is that how much across the board, we're so used to our politics in this country being divided, strictly along the lines of you're a Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative. I call these phony arguments, this idea that somehow we're not Americans. But on these issues, it is across the board. There is a large, huge majority of concern, and there is great anxiety on this.
Pat, you wanted to talk about these other
Let
numbers?
me just, I'm going to touch on 3 quick points here. You can see on the slides if I can see them. This is, we all remember the mosque. One of the problems that we're trying to address, I think, that Secure America Now is trying to do is to focus attention, to have the discussion. We have a vacuum in the discourse. There is no narrative about security and foreign policy in our politics. We're so domestically oriented. We're so much in the agendas of the politicians of both parties, as opposed to a discussion between ourselves as Americans. The issue of the mosque is a perfect example. I could take 50 different polls. When the first time I saw it, I was stunned. This is a CNN poll from early August, and I take it because it is probably, you know, is not, you know, is not, certainly not a conservative group or poll. This is the question about support or opposition. As you can see, 29% were in favor, 68% against. What is interesting to me is I know no other issue with these kinds of numbers in our political discourse where not only 82% of the Republicans and 70% of the independents, but a majority of Democrats, a majority of non-whites by a huge margin. And most importantly, and this is something we don't know enough about, the issue about the concern about security, particularly about radical Islam and the threat in general, is among women rather than men. It is counterintuitive. Most of the time we think of, and we saw taking military action, women tend to be, if you will, to generalize. Women tend to be much more conflict resolution oriented, much more let's sit down and talk, let's be nice. On these issues, women outpace men on everything having to do this by large margins in almost every poll. And I've never seen anything like it, and we don't know why, but it's clearly something has to do, I suspect, with their, hey, let me talk, okay? Okay, which is, it has to do with security, fear about their children, but it is a major important component. And I'm going to pick up on that in 1 second. Let me just go to the quickly to the next two. This is from the Washington Post poll. This is what is also happening. This has been tested every year compared to before 9/11. Do you think the country today is safe from terrorism or less safe? You can see by September, basically we've been running about in the 60 percentile, better than 2-to-1 slightly, that the country was safer than less safe. Look at the margin difference, almost a 40-point swing between September of 2008 and September of 2010. The sense of anxiety that we're becoming less safe is at work here, but it's not part of the political discourse or the answer of how we deal with it.
Pat, now, we have 10 minutes left here in our panel, and what I want to get at, and maybe you can address it here.
My last slide, then I'll show.
Oh, please.
Let me just go to this. This is from the Pew study that found 41% of the public says the United States plays a less important role in the world. It's the lowest number they've ever registered. And a reversal opinion from the beginning of 2009, 44%, almost half the country said China had now become the leading economic power, and rather than the United States. The last thing I want to point out about foreign policy, about this thing, and it goes, I suppose, to the politics. It's hard for me to ignore politics. One of the things is there's so many things happening we don't know about. Last week in Iran, we saw the stuff I mentioned about points about al-Qaeda getting weapons, the cell that was missing that we didn't find from 9/11. There was a story about that you might not have known. The Fort Hood incident, the report on Fort Hood, all of this got lost. But one of the ones that is most shocking to me is I believe if the American people, it's called the Molly Norris story. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. She is a journalist. She's a liberal journalist in Seattle for a weekly. She's a cartoonist. And she suggested everybody, she was so appalled at Comedy Central and the whole, the whole effort of suppression about free speech and the threats about, well, you know, of censoring about the Danish cartoons and other things. She suggested let's have a cartoon drawing Muhammad Day as a thing. It ended up getting her a fatwa from Mr. Alawi to be killed. She is in hiding. The FBI told her to go into hiding. She's in a kind of her own witness protection program, gave up her career, her life, and disappeared in the United States of America. The FBI said, we will not protect you, but we suggest you go into hiding. This is in our soil under threat because her life is threatened. There's something wrong here. I suspect the country would have reacted very strongly. The issue politically I find amazing is, particularly when you look at the attitudes about women and the fact that she was in Washington State in that very close Senate race. This is why, by the way, I must say, the Republican Party is so dumb and lame about its politics, but you had this very close race. That issue about Molly Norris was never raised in that race. It would have been a decisive factor. We must make these issues of security and put them into the national dialogue. I'm done, Joey.
So we have just a few minutes left here, but Pat, what I hope you can address is the paradox, because I look at the numbers from John McLaughlin, done for SecureAmericaNow.org, and I hear what you're saying, and we all know that if you just talk to people, the numbers are only starting to come out now in the president's handling of Egypt, and they're not positive because they're below 50%, but people don't have great confidence in him right now on foreign policy or on terrorism, and yet the Democrats, when it came to the 2010 elections, on that crosstab, 9% of voters who said that terrorism attack was the most important issue, the Democrats won by 13 points over Republicans.
And
why?
By the way, the margin, by the way, that meant that at least 1.5 to 2 points of the election results, there were at least a dozen House races, probably several Senate races, that were decided by that last-minute movement. The reason is very simple. Anytime there's a national security crisis, in the absence of any narrative or any discussion of the issue, the public rallies around the flag. You rally around the commander-in-chief. It's a very simple answer. There was no counter-narrative. There had been no argument about foreign policy.
I just want to comment.
It's a very simple reason to explain it.
At that point, they had intercepted those packages, the cartridges with the explosives. At that point, but how many people here from North Carolina? That's good, good. I was doing polling for a woman named Renee Elmers in North Carolina. And she beat an incumbent down there, Etheridge, but her first TV ad was about the Ground Zero Mosque. And it talked about how she was opposed to it, and people saying, that doesn't matter in North Carolina. Well, people around the country supported her, and it helped her set off and win that race. But there she was in North Carolina, in a rural area, where they were affected by that issue. The Ground Zero Mosque issue was the first signal that Americans are insecure. And Pat, your point about the plurality of voters that went along with the president, that plurality that was with them was because they had succeeded. But in the meantime, the rest of the country and the rest of the voters are very concerned that they may not succeed.
Yes, and let me just say this about the mosque issue, because it's very important. This issue keeps coming up. You know, I'm amazed. There is among the elites a view that somehow a discussion about the differentiation between radical Muslim extremism and is somehow an attack is Islamic phobia going on. And it's unbelievable. To me, it's amazing. The American people, you go through their attitudes. We've had no pogroms really in this country against Muslims or Islam. It is about people can differentiate. They can walk and chew gum at the same time. They can see what is dangerous and what is not. And the fact of the matter is this inability to have a discussion. The problem and what showed the results in New York City, in New York State, most liberal place in America, I suppose, other than where I used to live in Beverly Hills, is, I suppose, the opposition to it was overwhelming. Despite all the political leadership and all the elite saying, oh, no, you must do this, we're doing this. Look, the argument was a matter of common sense to people. And this notion that you keep telling people they're bigots and racists when they want to raise something, it's very dangerous in this society because it does allow the voices that are less rational. But the issue disappeared partly, by the way, because there are a number of Republicans who argue, oh, we shouldn't talk about this issue. We shouldn't deal with this. I just don't get it. We need to have a rational discussion, and we can do it in a unified fashion. But there is a difference, and you cannot say there's these blanket things. I mean, the elite is the greatest difference in this country right now is the politics between the political class, which is so estranged and might as well be in a separate planet from the mainstream of this country. And when I say the political class, I mean Democrats and Republicans both. And on no issue is this more so than on the question of securing this country and being able to deal with that. And we need to understand that difference. It is time to stop serving the politicians and their agendas and start serving the American agenda.
It seems that there is a change of pace right now from the Obama administration. In the midst of the meltdown in Egypt and the threat from Iran disappearing from the headlines, this week Janet Napolitano came before Congress and testified that the greatest threat we face is from within, from homegrown terrorism. And she went from not using the word terrorism at all last year in front of Congress to this year using it, I believe, 60-something times.
64 times.
Right. So do you see the narrative changing from a media standpoint, reflecting the administration's public shifting on this issue?
It's unclear to me what the administration's position on these things are. Clearly, the terrorism thing there is because the evidence is there. As I said a week ago, I mean, this country should have been engaged in a debate about the fact that we discovered that, and it's from WikiLeaks, by the way. I mean, there's some important things that came out of this. That that Al Qaeda is much closer to a dirty bomb and to chemical weapons than anybody thought. This is our own intelligence analysis that we didn't know. And that we had a missing cell running loose in 9/11 we still don't know about, that we didn't even have in the commission report. These subjects, this thing that's concerned about internal terrorism is very great. We see what's happening in Europe. In David Cameron's speech following the German leader, the Prime Minister's speech, look, they have a problem in Europe that we don't have yet. But it is a question here of, well, the one thing we've been able to do in this country is rather than the idea of every ship on its own bottom is having a national identity. You can all be different. We can all be what we are. I'm Irish American, Southerner. You know, talking about messed up, and a lot of people are in terms of mixtures, but and Catholic to boot. As a Southerner. But I'm saying, but this thing of group over the whole. E pluribus unum, and this is what's missing for people. And this issue for us is going to be very important. This notion of political correctness in the face of the idea of a national identity. That's who we are. Because the only thing in the whole, this my friend Richard Dreyfuss is doing this amazing thing about civics, the idea that we should have a civic engaged public. Without regard to party or ideology, that you can't have a democracy without it. And this is an example of it. And we have to have this question of putting, again, it's very much what I call the ideology of America, common sense. And the common sense thing is there's more that unites us than divides us. But we can't be told we can't talk about it because it will offend some minor number of people. I mean, we've got this ass backwards, if you pardon my expression. And the problem with this is if you don't have a rational discussion, I guarantee you, what you're talking about, Joel, soon with all this anxiety, we're going to see an irrational discussion, and we will all pay a price for that.
The one thing on that is Pete King's one of my clients, and Pete King, people have told him, don't do these hearings. Don't talk about domestic or radical Islam because you can't single them out. Pete King, you should encourage him. Those hearings where he got Secretary Napolitano up there, and he said, that's right, and he said, you didn't mention the word terrorism last year. You mentioned it over 60 times this year. Are you coming around? He's willing to say, please change your policies. But in the meantime, the security of the United States, and we should encourage Pete King, we should encourage more hearings like that because we have to keep that discussion going.
By the way, when we finish this, we're supposed to say that we're going to be down at the booth for Secure America now. So anybody wants to come down and see us, we're going to hold court down there later.
All right, so guys, before we go down to the booth at Secure America Now, we got about 30 seconds left. I just want to ask a 10-second answer from both Pat and from John. What do you see going forward for 2012? Can we have a vigorous but civil debate and dialogue on this and reach some sort of good policy approach to terrorism?
We're going to have to, because I'll tell you what, it is the secret issue of this election. We're all just focused on the economy and and the issue went rightfully so domestically. But when you saw this thing about America decline, you know, whatever it is, the sense we're going to sell the stock market to Germans, you know, it's amazing. But the sense that if we don't have this discussion, it is going to be let out of control. I believe that it is, in fact, in terms of a narrative, if we have a vacuum now, which is dangerous. If we have a positive narrative, it will turn out to be a huge issue. It could be a very decisive issue in this election.
I fully agree. You will have everybody's focused on the economy for the next election, but we showed those numbers. It is rare that you have a presidential election without a foreign policy or defense and security issue. It is there, it is going to happen, and it may be the deciding issue for those candidates that are running, whether they want to discuss and address these issues. If they ignore it, they probably do it at their own peril. When you have big numbers like that and you say to a candidate, 75%, you're going to ignore that? Why do you want to run on things that you're going to lose? So they will have to pay attention to it because you are there, and the fact that you're all here listening to this is a sign that this is an extremely important issue. Americans, yes, we're concerned about losing our jobs, our homes, our health care, but we're also now concerned about losing our country.
And just the last point, you know, Clemenceau once said about the war was too important to be left to generals. This notion, there is among the elite the notion of you people go away. We will deal with this in our own way that we want to about foreign policy, because you're too stupid and ignorant to understand. What the Secure America Now is doing is providing a platform for the American people to interject themselves. It is your interest, it is the interest of your children and the security of this country that will be decided. And without that voice, I don't want the elite making these decisions on their own basis. So,
Thank you very much, everyone.